This is why I always encourage people to read the word for themselves so they can see. All right, let's reach Exodus chapter 14, verse 21, and going down to like verse 29, right? He said, "And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning, watch, that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels, so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. And the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Okay, what am I pointing out today? Today I want to point out to you that if you are in church and you're hearing a pastor teach, or you watch any movie, or you watch any documentary, you will see that Moses raised his staff, or maybe his hand, right? Some of them show staff, and the sea split. Immediately they go into the ocean, they followed, they made it to the other side, and it happened that fast. Okay, now this is a small detail, but if you read it for yourself, you will see that it took all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, not his staff, y'all, his hand, just his hand, over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night. How long? All that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Skipped over here. Now it came to pass in the morning, all that night, then in the morning watch, that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians. I mean, in the morning, the army of the Egyptians were still alive. He looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels. Now, you got to say that's funny here. God took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. Skip here. Okay, then he said, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it, right? So what happened here? In the morning, it took all that night for the wind to blow to create that wall on the left and on the right. And it wasn't until the morning. They still were on their chariots, right? So it was the army, the chariots, a lot of people, not only God's people crossing through on foot, right? Walking through the ocean, but it was also the Egyptians on their chariots and on their horsemen. It's a lot of people. This is Pharaoh's whole army. Imagine Pharaoh's whole army having to cross over. So I just wanted to point that out to y'all today, that not only did he raise his hand, and again here, he raised his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, okay, because it took all that night. So whenever you're watching a show, you're watching a documentary, you're watching a movie about this passage here with the Egyptians, with the people getting away from the Egyptians, away from slavery, it took all night long. But you would know that, and I didn't pay attention to that until I read this, and I'm like, hold on. So he didn't raise his staff, because I've always heard the staff, and also it took all night, and it didn't happen until the morning that they crossed over. Because you got to imagine, it's thousands of people. We're not going to say millions, but we're going to say thousands of people. Not only the chariots and the whole army and the horsemen and everything like that, plus the people, right? That was coming across. So yeah, just a little bit for the day. Remember to live your light, y'all.